Welcome to New York Nonprofit Media. My name is Jeff Stein, and I'm here in the CEO Corner with Michael Clark, President and Executive Director of the the Nonprofit Coordinating Committee of New York. I'm so sorry for butchering the name. But Michael is a true guru of the nonprofit sector here in New York and also nationally, and we're just so excited that you're here to share all of your thoughts. After an illustrious career that I guess is coming to a close, you're stepping down in September?
Yeah, I'm not retiring. I'm just moving from full-time to part-time. So in September, I'm going to step down as the Executive Director of the Nonprofit Coordinating Committee.
Okay, but you'll still be actively involved in the organization?
I'm more so in the work in general, and we've already identified my successor, which is going to be identified in our press release next week.
Ooh.
And that's been months in the making, and we're very pleased with the person who's stepping in. So
great.
We have a very organized transition process, as befits an organization that preaches best management and best governance practices.
Exactly. We were just sort of joking about how you're essentially a meta nonprofit and really get to experience both sides of operating a nonprofit and also serving nonprofits. So maybe if you could just give an overview of what the coordinating committee does, all of the workshops, all of those sorts of things.
We do three basic things. We have a big government relations committee that tracks all the potential regulations and other laws that affect the way nonprofits operate. And we try to not only keep our own performance on track so that nonprofits are accountable, transparent, effective, but we also run workshops and do a lot of educational work for nonprofit organizations so that they are performing, in ways that are admirable and are appropriate. So that's a big mouthful, and we could spend the whole interview just on that. That's one thing we do, government relations work, tracking, taking the best lessons, passing them on to nonprofits, and sometimes advocating for changes in public policy. Second of all, we do a lot of what's called capacity building, one of my least favorite terms, but it really comes down to helping nonprofits perform better, help the managers of nonprofits manage better, help the board members do a better job of governing, and at a little bit more granular level, make sure that nonprofits are achieving results, not just putting some big puffy mission statement on a wall and then doing whatever they feel like, but they have some accountability there for the results of their work. So there's that, right? And then the third thing we do is we help nonprofits save money. We're in the business of negotiating discounts on a lot of things. We have, I think at the moment, 15 discount programs for our members. And we have a membership due structure, sliding scale. The bottom level is $35 a year. The top level is $1,500, all different size budgets of nonprofits. And for organizations that have an annual budget of $5,000 to organizations that have an annual budget of 30 or 40 million. So there's a huge range of types, and our due structure mirrors that. So for those dues paying members, we provide about 50, 60 workshops a year, but we also provide all these discounts that allow them to save money on the business basics for nonprofits, everything from directors and officers insurance to, the office supplies, various kinds of other things that nonprofits have to do their business.
So I know that a big part of what the coordinating committee does is in partnership with the New York Community Trust, the Nonprofit Excellence Awards. Maybe if you can talk about the awards generally, and also how that informs your work in terms of really helping nonprofits think about what best practices are in all of the major fields of concern, and also how nonprofits who aren't involved can get involved in that.
Okay. Having run nonprofits for a good part of my life and then been in the business of helping people run nonprofits, what they call technical assistance and training and coaching and all that sort of stuff. Over time it became clearer and clearer to me that nonprofit managers need some clarity. I once made the mistake in 2006, in the summer of 2006, I Googled nonprofit management excellence, and I got 3.2 million entries. So I thought, I don't think the average nonprofit manager is going to read those 3.2 million. And I did, by the way, I did this last year, and it was 7.8 million. So there's a lot of literature on how to run a nonprofit, how not to run a nonprofit, what to do, and so on. So some coherence out of all that seems to us really important. And around the country, there are about 39 other organizations like us that are associations that are sector-wide, that cover all the nonprofits, mostly at the state level.
Yeah, so how do you distill all of that information and, and package it in a way that's really beneficial?
Exactly, because if you're busy running a nonprofit, and you generally are very busy, then you just don't have time to do endless research. And so, you need an organization like NPCC to be your sort of repository, your portal into all that.
Right.
And so we created a number of things, actually. We do about 60 workshops for our members a year and stuff. But the Nonprofit Excellence Awards program that you ask about is actually, I think, our sort of finest hour, because what we did was look at all of the standards of excellence programs and the principles and practices programs of all those other associations around the country that sort of set some sort of certification floor. And we said, instead of a floor, we want to be aspirational. We want to say, what do excellently managed nonprofits look like? And because we think you learn more from excellence than you do from adequacy. So we began to study the question of what does exceptional leadership look like in the 8 key areas that program is based on, which run from tracking the results of your work at the program level. I think most people, if you give money to a nonprofit, the first thing you want to know is not how much money do they spend on bookkeeping or
right.
How often does their board meet. The first thing you want to know is, are they accomplishing what they say they're going to accomplish? So there's an accountability there for results. But there are a lot of other issues that people may not think about from a distance that are quite important. Does the board function well? Does it get along well with the executive director and do its appointed job of overseeing some parts of what the executive director and staff do? Does it manage its finances wisely? And I must say, a lot of people are very confused about the finances of nonprofits. We don't have a long enough show here to get into how to solve that question, but we deliver a lot of guidance through this program about how to do good management on the financial front. And here's a little tip: it's way more complicated than getting an audit every year.
Yeah.
We work on communications. Nonprofits today, if we're talking about 2015. Have to have a very robust communications agenda, right. Both outgoing and incoming communications, social media, all that stuff. We look at human resources practices. Nonprofits of all organizations should be treating their employees and volunteers in admirable and exemplary ways. And I could keep on going, but there are 8 total areas, and
right,
each
right.
of these areas, we have basically been scanning the heavens around the country, and the New York Community Trust became our title sponsor of this program about 6 years ago, and we're very happy to have them because they're in the business they're the largest grant-making foundation in town to New York City nonprofits and New York City area nonprofits. So they have the same problem. They have to figure out what are the right criteria for excellence. So they joined us. We have a number of other foundations that support the program that we're very proud of, and I could run through those in a minute, but the point is that collaboratively, we work with Philanthropy New York, we work with the New York Community Trust, we work with a number of foundations that care a lot about nonprofit management and governance, and we've pulled this together into much more user-friendly guides and directions and what we call strategies, management and governance strategies.
So, I'd love to get your thoughts on we were just sort of delving into philanthropy and the NPCC's work with foundations. I think a really interesting topic for discussion right now is the relationship between the philanthropic world and nonprofits. It seems like sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between the two worlds about what each entity wants to get out of the relationship. Philanthropy, is maybe sometimes more interested in funding very unique and new and exciting programs. Nonprofits feel like they need help with, maybe unsexy ideas like, just general operating costs. How do you think the two groups can bridge that gap?
Well, I think I think first of all, it's a pretty good summary of some of the, and certainly one of the main tensions. But I think these things do get bridged on a regular basis. And the first way is for both sides to admit that, you know, if nonprofits just went on forever getting general operating support as though that was the main reason for their existence
Yeah.
was their existence, you would have a problem, right?
Right.
On the other hand, if you just had, you know, every bright, shiny new thing that hits the nonprofit sector, you said, okay, let's throw some money at that. I actually don't know any foundations that do that, but you are addressing some of the tensions that affect both sides. But the thing to remember, and I think we have Philanthropy New York, the organization that represents the foundation sector in New York. We have them as a partner in managing this program for a very specific reason. Foundations need nonprofits that are well run,
Right.
so that they can feel like they're giving money to people that not only are doing important things on paper, but are actually running their operations well and achieving results. Nonprofits, on the other hand, need philanthropy. They need funding, obviously, but they also sometimes need guidance. Foundations often have more research capability and more chance to explore what's coming up. So, you know, if you get a good dialogue going on a regular basis, and we think we do have one, then I think you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah. Switching gears a little bit, I know you mentioned the Government Relations Committee that the MPCC has as sort of an advocacy branch of what you're doing. Maybe if you could speak a little bit about the issues that you're really focusing on right now, looking forward, and also, also sort of looking back to the Nonprofit Revitalization Act, you know, the good things that have come out of that, and also changes that you're advocating for.
Well, we were founded in 1984 by a set of lawyers who were working on a case, collectively they were working on an issue that had to do with taxation, real estate taxation of nonprofits. And we opposed the city's move at that time to revoke all the real estate tax exemptions of all the nonprofits in town. And that brought out every nonprofit attorney in the city. And they started meeting on a regular basis, and they met for quite a while, and they finally had to take some cases all the way to the state appeals court, and prevailed, I'm happy to say, and the city backed off. And that group of lawyers called itself the Nonprofit Coordinating Committee. That's where our name comes from. So, you know, we have a history based in advocacy to protect the basic conditions under which nonprofits advocate. Operate. We don't advocate, my particular organization does not advocate for more money for healthcare or more money for schools or more money for any part of the sector. We advocate for keeping the regulatory environment, or what we sometimes call the regulatory regime under which the nonprofit operates, nonprofit sector operates. We want to keep that as non-burdensome as possible, so that nonprofit executive directors and boards don't spend 80% of their time on compliance issues, but rather spend 80% of their time focusing on their missions.
Right.
But we're not opposed to regulation. We're not a sort of chamber of commerce for nonprofits. We don't say, don't touch nonprofits.
Right.
We understand that nonprofits operate in a sort of semi-public sphere. They are accountable for their resources and the way they use them, and we don't have any problem with that. We just hope that nonprofits don't spend 21 hours out of every 35 doing compliance work, because that doesn't seem like a good use of their time. So the idea is to get nonprofits to be managed and governed as accountably and effectively as possible, and then meanwhile be able to focus on their missions. And I think most people, when they give money to a nonprofit, they want to know that it's got some evidence that it's achieving its mission. So if it's a daycare center, it's actually taking care of children in a responsible way, or if it's a soup kitchen, it's actually getting people, food, and so on. So that's kind of a way of thinking about the relationship.
Maybe as a final question, I know that you mentioned you're stepping down from the executive director position that you've held for quite some time, and you've worked in this sector for decades. What was your initial inspiration for getting into work in the nonprofit world, and what have you seen as the biggest changes over the course of your career?
Well, I sort of came up out of the social change movements of the 1960s and 70s. I organized migrant workers in Oklahoma. I was at Cornell University involved, and for that matter, when I was teaching at the University of Tennessee before that, I was involved in civil rights issues. I taught at a school that was 75 miles north of where Martin Luther King was killed. This was hard not to get involved in civil rights work in Tennessee in those years, and for that matter, I would suggest probably today. So those were the issues that moved me, like a lot of people my age in those days. And then I began to get involved in some actual nonprofit organizations that were working on some of those issues. A notable one was something called the Health Policy Advisory Center, which was a shop that put out an advocacy magazine, really, that covered health politics in New York City, and did a certain amount of muckraking and also did a certain amount of direct advocacy trying to change the city's health policies in what we defined as a progressive tradition and direction. So that's sort of my inspiration. I mean, before that, I guess you would say I was inspired to a substantial degree by I was raised and went to Catholic schools. I went to high school in the era of Pope John the 23rd, which was my generation's version of Pope Francis, a sort of social change, social progressive type pope. And so I thought this was, what any moral individual ought to be doing in those days. And so did lots of other people my age. It's not an accident that all those social movements just came popping up.
Right.
So, I got inspired from that end. And then as I got into working on some of those issues and deeper into what would it take to create institutional change and to move things forward in a more lasting way, I got more and more interested in nonprofit organizations and what a huge asset on the one hand. This is really something I think Americans do not in any way appreciate enough. We have the broadest definition of tax-exempt charitable activity of any country in the world by a light year. In many other countries, there are 4 or 5 categories of things you can do and not pay taxes if you donate to it. In this country, there are 112 categories of activity, and it's a country with a very vital, robust, and constantly dynamic sector of nonprofit organizations, about 1.5 million in the country. We've been like that since the beginning. If you can go back and read de Tocqueville's Observations of America in the 1830s, and he talks about what a peculiar country this is. When Americans, when these colonists actually, when these Americans see a social problem, instead of appealing to the appropriate body of government to come in and fix it, Americans tend to say, let's organize a committee and tackle it directly. There are limits to that model, but that is sort of where we came from, right? It was, a very new country. So there's a lot of value to that because it means that it's a sector, the nonprofit world, that can change and adapt, for the most part, much more nimbly than I would say even government does.
Right.
But on the other hand, over time, you realize that there are limits even to the nonprofit sector.
Right.
So I've been in it for about 40-something years now. I've loved every minute of it. I have had some incredible, positive, exciting experiences working on everything from community policing to changing the Koch administration's mind about closing all the hospitals, a lot of municipal hospitals, to some of the more traditional issues that I just ran through, and learning a lot at every step of that way. It's really been fascinating.
Great.
So,
well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your thoughts, and thank you for watching.
you're welcome.